Welcome to Midnight Whispers, where the night doesn't whisper, it warns. As you lie in the safety of your bed, imagine footsteps in the forest, eyes watching from behind the trees, and truths too terrifying to ignore. These aren't just stories, they're echoes from the shadows, real accounts whispered under breath by those who survived. So close your eyes, but don't fall asleep too fast. The darkness remembers. What if a children's game could reveal your deepest family secret years before you ever knew the truth? That's precisely what happened to me. I was just starting high school when a friend and I, caught between boredom and a flicker of genuine curiosity, decided to mess around with a Ouija board. We devoured all the classic horror stories, but our main goal was to make it legit. Our rule was simple: ask each other deeply personal questions, things the other person couldn't possibly know or fake. If the board delivered real answers, then we'd know something genuinely strange was afoot. My turn arrived. For context, my stepdad had been a fixture in my life since I was 4, and as far as my friend knew, he was my only father. So, when I posed the question about my biological father, it was something she had no way of guessing or fabricating. The planchette began its slow, deliberate glide across the board. M-A-R. I remember distinctly rolling my eyes, stopping it right there. That's not even remotely close, I scoffed internally. The name I'd grown up with, the man I believed was my father, was entirely different. I shrugged it off, concluding the board was either malfunctioning or just randomly spitting out letters. Yet, fast forward 2 years, I was older, and through a painful series of whispered conversations and eventual tearful confrontations, I uncovered a shocking truth. My mom had been lying to me about my biological father the entire time. The man I'd always called Dad wasn't my real father. A man whose existence I was only just learning about was named Martin. Martin. It didn't even click until months later. My friend and I casually reminiscing about that spooky Ouija session, laughing about some of the bizarre responses. Then, it hit me. A cold, hard punch in the gut. We both stared at each other in stunned silence. And I swear, every hair on my body stood on end. The board had told me before my own family ever did. To this day, it remains one of the wildest, most surreal experiences of my life. Was it pure chance, a bizarre coincidence of letters, or was something truly trying to communicate a hidden, uncomfortable truth? From a premonition of truth delivered by an unexpected source, we now shift to an equally profound, yet different, kind of personal revelation, one born from the raw, aching space of grief. After my father passed away, something occurred that my mother still finds incredibly difficult to talk about. It was an ordinary afternoon. She was walking through the living room, bathed in the usual spill of sunlight from the window. And there he was, sitting on the couch, legs casually crossed, calm as ever. He was wearing one of his favorite shirts, the kind he used to wear before illness took its toll. He looked utterly whole, healthy, like his vibrant self again. He met her eyes, a small smile playing on his lips, half amused, half tender, the way he used to when he knew something you didn't. He wasn't a translucent mist, a shifting shadow, or a shimmering outline. He wasn't see-through, nor was he glowing. He looked completely, undeniably solid, just as he had in life. But my mother was, and always has been, terrified of ghosts. So, instead of comfort, all she felt was overwhelming panic. She blurted out, her voice cracking, "What are you doing here? You don't belong here." She turned away for a split second, a desperate attempt to break the vision. When she looked back, he was gone. The couch was empty, as if he'd never been there at all. Years drifted by. That chilling afternoon became a hushed secret. something we only spoke of in whispers, if at all. Until one night, it happened to me. I'd drifted off to sleep in the living room recliner. I stirred, needing to use the restroom, but didn't quite get up. That's when I felt it. Someone gently climbed on top of me, settling their head on my shoulder. It wasn't scary. It wasn't even surprising. It felt deeply, profoundly familiar. Without a conscious thought, I wrapped my arms around them, hugging back. I could feel the distinct shape of a man's back, the soft fabric of an undershirt beneath my hands, the weight, the warmth, the unmistakable scent. Every fiber of my being told me exactly who it was. It was my dad. That hug felt precisely the same way it used to when he was alive, particularly in his final years when undershirts and pajama pants were his uniform. In that moment, there was no question, no doubt. And then I fully woke. The recliner was empty, but that feeling, that profound sense of his presence, stayed deep within me. I carried it for days, not with fear, but with an inexplicable peace. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I know what I felt, and I know what my mom saw, and I truly believe there is something profound beyond this life. Could such a solid, visceral presence be a comforting, final visit, or something more complex and mysterious that defies our understanding of life and death? And how would you react if a lost loved one appeared to you, not as a translucent specter, but as solid and real as they were in life? Would you embrace them, or would fear take hold? These profound personal experiences often challenge our worldview, pushing us to question the very fabric of reality. My own personal philosophy, for instance, is a healthy mix of skeptic and believer. Without tangible proof or undeniable evidence, I instinctively lean towards skepticism. Yet, I've personally experienced enough to conclude that the supernatural, in some form, undeniably exists. I approach religion with a similar perspective. I identify as agnostic, but also as pagan. I cannot accept the existence of a God without proof. But, should that proof ever be undeniably provided, I would acknowledge that deities exist, whether I chose to personally worship them or not. My worship has already been claimed, after all. To me, skepticism and belief can and should go hand in hand. Skepticism tempers belief, ensuring rational thought can still seek explanations. Growing up in rural Minnesota, I've learned to keep my eyes firmly away from the side of the road at night, precisely to avoid encountering that kind of undeniable proof. The first incident occurred in the middle of a school trip to Washington, D.C. We were on the expansive lawn in front of the White House. I needed to use the restroom, so I headed towards a nearby park bathroom. As I approached, my eyes landed on a woman sitting on a park bench directly across from the bathroom entrance. At first glance, she simply appeared to be a homeless woman taking a well-deserved rest, but something about her felt profoundly wrong. She sat there, staring directly at me, with a gaze that held a chilling malice, sending a genuine shiver down my spine. I felt an intense discomfort under her unwavering stare, though at the time, I attributed it to social anxiety. Then, I noticed the bugs. I couldn't tell if they were bees, wasps, or hornets, but they swarmed through the air, landing and crawling all over her exposed skin. And the entire time, she didn't react. Not a flinch, not a brush of the hand. I had a severe phobia of insects back then, one I'm still working to overcome. So once I registered the swarm, pure terror and panic seized me. I practically sprinted away. It was only afterwards, when my rapid heartbeat subsided and the immediate panic attack eased, that the true wrongness of the situation truly set in. I don't know what she was. Perhaps just an incredibly resilient old woman who valued rest more than she feared stinging insects. but I still don't believe she was human. The second incident happened years later. I was driving deliveries for a pizza place, and it was late at night. I was the closing driver, so it was just me and the manager left. I'd been on shift, burning the midnight oil, having come in early and now staying late. It was after closing hours, but we still had a stack of deliveries to get through before we could even start cleaning. And just a quick side note, if you're ever thinking of ordering delivery half an hour before closing, please don't asterisk. That single delivery can be the difference between a driver going home or working an extra hour. Needless to say, I was utterly drained. As I was making a delivery along a deserted back road, my high beams illuminated something. It looked like a dog or a wolf, incredibly dark and large, shimmering strangely in my headlights as it crossed the road. The road made a wide, sweeping turn around a big hill. After the dark creature passed, I fully expected it to bound up the hill. I was keeping a careful eye on it. I'd hit enough animals over the years, and I certainly didn't want to hit another. But it didn't go up the hill. It went into the hill. A solid, bare hill. It was dark, and I was tired, so could it have been a trick of my eyes? Perhaps. But my brights were on, shining directly on it as it seemed to bounce off the road and simply phase through the solid earth. There were no trees, no thick brush for it to hide in until the very top of the hill. I'm not always the most observant person, but noticing animals on the road is a learned exception for me. These experiences, individually, might have rational answers, but something deep within me screams that they were far from rational, hinting at something truly paranormal underlying the fabric of our reality. What are your thoughts? Have you ever witnessed something that defied all logic? Something that made you question the very nature of existence? From the deeply personal revelations within our own lives, let's turn our attention to places where history and tragedy can leave an indelible, and often terrifying, mark on the very ground we stand on. Imagine living above a burning abyss, where the ground itself could swallow you whole. But what if the true horror lies not in the earth, but in the echoes of tragedy within the homes above? We began this journey exploring deeply personal revelations, but sometimes the deepest truths are etched into the very landscape, in places scarred by history and tragedy. Take Centralia, Pennsylvania, for instance. If you've ever heard of it, you know it's a town consumed. For over half a century, an inferno has raged beneath its surface, a subterranean coal fire ripping through seams, leaving behind an eerie, apocalyptic wasteland. Even in the dead of winter, you can witness steam hissing up from cracked earth, as if the land itself is exhaling a toxic breath. The fire devoured underground caverns, even encroaching on the town cemetery, and over time, the population dwindled to a stubborn handful. The place is remarkably dangerous now, with the very real, terrifying possibility that your home could be swallowed whole, sending you straight into a literal inferno. But Centralia itself isn't the scariest part of this story. My aunt and her husband lived just a few towns over in an old house built directly above a massive coal dig. Back in the day, miners tunneled everywhere beneath the land, and no one truly knew if those dark passages snaked under their homes. Sometimes, without warning, the ground would simply give out. Yards would sink, basements would buckle. Living in that area was always a gamble. The house my aunt bought had a history soaked in tragedy. The man who lived there before had lost his wife in a horrific accident. She fell down the steep basement stairs straight to the cold, unforgiving floor where they used to shovel coal into the furnace. Not long after, the husband passed away in the exact same way. He fell to his death, lying broken and alone at the bottom of the stairs, his body undiscovered for days. When my aunt and her husband moved in, they knew none of this. But it didn't take long for them to realize something was profoundly wrong. The strangeness started small. They'd be outside, hanging laundry, when the radio inside would suddenly switch stations. My aunt enjoyed low-frequency stations, smooth jazz, soft rock, but the dial would jump to high frequencies, blasting country music, a genre she actively disliked. It was as if someone was deliberately tuning the radio to annoy her. Then the noises began. At night, after the sun dipped below the horizon, the house came alive, creaking, groaning. It wasn't just the sound of an old house settling. Doors would slam shut by themselves, almost violently, when no one was near them. Footsteps would echo through the halls, but when they checked for an intruder, there was never anyone there. It was the basement, though, that was the main offender. Every time they went down there, whether to store something or clean, the activity spiked. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if pressurized. My aunt said she always had the unnerving sensation of being watched, and the more they made changes to the house, the worse the phenomena seemed to get. One night, after weeks of escalating disturbances, my aunt finally snapped. She'd reached her breaking point. She sat down with her husband, and they came up with an idea as desperate as it was strange. They decided to talk to the spirit. They went down into the basement, right to the bottom of those cursed stairs, and spoke aloud to the man who had died there. They begged and pleaded for peace. My aunt told him they wouldn't make any more changes to the house for a few months if he would just leave them alone. She swears she felt the air shift after that, a subtle, almost imperceptible change in pressure. And for a while, things actually got better. For about 7 or 8 months, the house was quiet. No footsteps, no slamming doors, and the radio stayed on its intended station. But it was temporary. Years later, after they sold the house and moved away, the new owners had a different, chilling experience. The house collapsed. It caved in right around the area where the man had died, at the bottom of those stairs. Some people blamed the old coal tunnels beneath, saying the ground had finally given out, but my aunt doesn't think it was the earth shifting. She thinks it was him. Maybe he finally took the house with him. Either way, the house is gone now. What do you think? Can the very ground and the structures upon it retain the echo of past tragedies? From the echoing grief within a collapsing house, we journey now to a deeply unsettling account from rural Alabama, where the earth itself seemed to yield something ancient and malevolent. It happened in the deep woods, a quiet, rural area where, out of nowhere, the peace was disrupted. Massive dirt trucks started coming in and out of the woods at all hours, day and night, hauling dirt from somewhere behind our property. Naturally, we were curious. After a while, we started taking long walks to see what was going on. Eventually, we found the source. They'd dug up something, a large hole that looked like the entrance to a cave. It didn't look like a job site or a construction project. No signs posted, no crew standing around, just trucks and this strange, wide opening in the earth. We never saw anyone actually working down there. That's when the truly weird stuff started happening. First, it was symbols. Strange markings began appearing in the dirt near our home. They weren't random. There was something deliberate about them. Geometric shapes, spirals, lines intersecting in patterns we didn't recognize. We hadn't seen anyone near the property who could explain how they got there. Then our kids began refusing to play outside. They kept saying they saw dark things with green eyes in the woods. At first, we thought they were just spooked by shadows or maybe telling stories, but their fear wasn't unfounded. They wouldn't even go near the edge of the yard, especially after dusk. Our dogs, usually full of energy, started acting strange, too. They didn't want to go outside anymore. Sometimes they would bark or growl at nothing, just stare out the window or towards the woods and tremble. This was new for them. Whatever it was, it had unsettled them completely. At night, we began hearing things, sounds from under the house, thumping, scraping, like something heavy tumbling around beneath us. One night, we finally decided to check it out. We took flashlights and crawled under the house, and that's when I saw it. The best way I can describe it is a tree person. That's what it looked like. Tall, with long limbs, bark-like skin. It moved like a person, but there was something unnatural in the way it stood. Too stiff, too still. It wasn't a shadow, and it wasn't an animal either. And then it began throwing rocks. I scrambled out as fast as I could, but the strangest moment came a few nights later. I was outside, near the edge of the property, when I heard my husband calling for me from across the street in the tree line. "Come here," he said, calmly at first. I didn't question it. I recognized his voice, and I began walking towards the trees. It was almost completely dark then, and I was just about to step into the shadowed brush when I heard something shout behind me. It was my husband yelling from the porch. Where are you going? What are you doing?" I turned back. He was right there. There was no way he could have crossed the road, circled back, and beaten me home. I then realized whatever was calling me from the trees wasn't him. I didn't look back. I just ran. Other strange things continued to happen over the next few weeks. Lights flickering for no reason, objects moving, more noises at night. But none of it was ever consistent. Just this steady unease, like we were being watched. Then, after nearly 3 months, the trucks returned. But this time, they weren't hauling anything out. They were filling the cave back in. They dumped loads of dirt into that hole, and then they left. They were simply gone. And to this day, I don't know what that cave was, or what they were doing, or what they awoke. But it affected our entire household. And we, and the land, haven't been the same since. How much do environmental factors influence these phenomena, especially when ancient ground is disturbed? As unsettling as these rooted hauntings are, sometimes the entities we encounter don't just stay put. What happens when an unseen presence watches you, follows you, and even mimics those closest to you? Imagine seeing someone you know, vividly, only for them to vanish into thin air, and then for that same apparition to reappear weeks or even years later. Are you witnessing a ghost? Or something far more unsettling? The previous stories explored how places can hold on to dark energy. But sometimes, the unseen forces don't just stay put. What happens when an unseen presence watches you, follows you, and even mimics those closest to you? That's exactly what happened to a colleague of mine in their old office building, a place steeped in history and shadow. The building itself was a relic, a 3-story house in downtown Mississippi, constantly creaking and groaning as old buildings do. I often worked late, the first to arrive and last to leave, and frequently heard what sounded distinctly like voices upstairs when no one else was there. Others had reported similar disembodied sounds. But things got much stranger on a crisp September evening in 2015. 2 colleagues, David and Ronnie, planned to meet at the office after work to head to a late-night Star Wars toy release event. I pulled into the front lot and saw Ronnie, who lived nearby and often walked, heading up the front steps into the office. I noticed Ronnie was wearing different clothes than he had on earlier, but didn't think much of it at the time. Getting out of the car, I headed to the door, expecting to find Ronnie inside. But the door was locked. Thinking Ronnie was playing a joke, I knocked, but no one answered. A moment later, a wave of confusion, then cold dread, washed over me. As I turned back to my car, I saw the real Ronnie walking up the sidewalk from his apartment, dressed in the clothes he'd worn to work all day. I didn't say anything immediately, But my unease must have been palpable because Ronnie asked what was wrong. As I explained what I'd seen, David and his wife arrived. The group did a quick search around the fenced office, expecting to head off whoever had gone around the building, but found absolutely no one. David and his wife, not having seen anything, shrugged it off, but for me, the image of the other Ronnie was seared into my mind. Months passed, and the incident faded until one Monday morning. Arriving early to work, I disarmed the security system and began my usual routine of turning on lights. As I walked, I noticed Ronnie standing by the copier, facing away. Assuming he'd somehow beaten me there, I said, "Morning." No reply. Later that day, needing Ronnie's input for a project, I asked Ronnie's wife where he was. "He's homesick," she replied. "He's been sick all weekend." Again, the chill. Ronnie hadn't been there at all. The pattern continued. A year or two later, I saw Ronnie walking up the steps to the second floor, only for the real Ronnie and his wife to arrive minutes later, dressed completely differently. For years, I was the only one who had seen the other Ronnie. People at work considered it a spooky anecdote for Halloween. Until earlier this year, when Wade, our project manager, had his own encounter. Wade, a grounded, no-nonsense guy, had returned to the locked office after hours to retrieve something. As he headed upstairs, he saw Ronnie sitting at a desk, facing a computer. "Hey," Wade said, but got no reply. He went to the restroom, and when he came back out, Ronnie was gone. The front door never made its telltale ding sound, so no one had entered or left. The other Ronnie always wears jeans, often seen on the real Ronnie. It's always facing away. Neither Wade nor I ever saw its face, only its build and size. It never speaks, never truly does anything, except for that first time it was seen walking up the front steps. What is this? A residual haunting? A doppelganger? A sentient shadow that mimics the familiar? What would you do if you saw a colleague, vivid and solid, only for them to vanish and reappear, subtly confirming a terrifying reality that only you, and now a select few, could see? The haunting reality of an unseen watcher that follows you, not just from room to room, but across vast distances, is a truly chilling thought. My next story comes from a friend whose experience began 4 years ago when they moved onto their aunt's farm in southwest Saskatchewan. The old house on the property initially felt comforting, but soon, an unsettling feeling crept in. A sense of being watched through the windows at night. A dread of taking their puppy outside after dark, even with the farm dog keeping the frequent coyotes at bay. One rainy day, while exasperated with their puppy during a potty break, amid the unusually loud lowing of cows in a nearby pasture, a strange whistling sound cut through the air. They dismissed it as an owl. Then, from directly behind them, a deep, raspy voice whispered, "Go." They froze. "Go, go," it repeated, sounding like it was filtered through an ancient, broken radio. Spinning around, they found nothing. As they scooped up their puppy and hurried inside, the voice spoke one last time. Go. They spent the night locked in, lights and television blaring to drown out the memory of the voice. The next morning, their uncle found 2 dead calves in the pasture. Nothing else was reported, but the ominous connection lingered. Months later, they moved 2 provinces over to interior British Columbia, hoping to leave the eerie events behind. But the entity, or whatever it was, seemed to have followed. A month ago, in the dead of winter, they took their dog into the backyard. Normally, eager to be outside, the dog suddenly refused to step through the door. Coaxed out, she tiptoed nervously across the yard, staring intently towards the garage. Without warning, she bolted back towards the house, dragging her owner inside. Looking back towards the garage, there was nothing visible, but the familiar, uneasy feeling returned, followed by that same, short, unsettling whistle they'd heard back in Saskatchewan. They raced inside, locking the doors. The next day, their boyfriend informed them their tenant had found a hunk of meat left outside his door, a deeply disturbing discovery given recent reports of poisoned dogs in the area. And then, both the narrator and their boyfriend began having eerily similar nightmares, often about life or death situations, waking up stressed and drained. With everything that's happened, especially the profound impact on their dog, my friend can't shake the feeling that something is actively following them, stalking them across provinces. What do you think this entity is? How would you cope with the terrifying reality that an unseen presence has chosen you, specifically, as its target, and seems to be growing bolder the further you run? Sometimes, though, the unsettling presence isn't just a solo encounter. Sometimes it's a shared terror, an entity experienced by more than one, leaving a collective scar. This next account comes from a pair of siblings who experienced a shared terror one summer evening in an old, weather-worn barn near their house. A barn attached to an even older, abandoned farmhouse. The place had a spooky reputation. Locals said the original owners died there decades ago and were buried on the property. The siblings, having permission from the owner's grandkids, decided to explore. The brother hoped to catch a glimpse of the barn swallows nesting in the rafters, a surprisingly peaceful reason for venturing into a reputedly haunted place. To understand the tension, you need to know the barn's layout. 2 doors, but only the front one opens. The back one is rusted shut. Annoyingly, the light switch is right next to the broken back door, meaning anyone entering after dark had to navigate the pitch-black barn to reach the lights. Armed with only the dim glow of the setting sun, they ventured in, made it to the switch, and flipped on the lights. They spent some time talking, looking at the baby birds, just killing time. Eventually, bored, the narrator handed their phone to their brother so he could use its flashlight to turn off the lights and walk back safely through the dark. The narrator stayed by the front door, holding it open, waiting. That's when the brother's voice cut through the silence, tense and shaky. "Sam? Yeah, just checking if you're still there." He sounded off, trying to be casual, but failing. Moments later, he was walking fast through the barn towards the narrator. They didn't talk about it immediately, just shut the door and started the short walk home. It wasn't until they were a few blocks away, the barn out of sight, that the brother stopped, turned, and looked at the narrator with a pale, serious expression. "Okay, now we're away from the barn. Can I tell you what I saw?" He wasn't joking. As he'd swept the flashlight around just after turning off the lights, he caught something in the beam. Something tall, at least 7 feet, standing just a few feet away, still as a statue. Its skin looked dead. Its face had eyes but no mouth, just a blank space where it should have been, and those eyes locked onto him. Instinctively, he whipped the light back around, thinking it was the narrator trying to scare him, but there was nothing there. That's when he called out, just to confirm the narrator was still by the front door. He later confessed that even though the barn was empty when he looked again, he still felt whatever it was still there. And here's the most unsettling part. The other sibling had felt it too. While standing alone at the front door before the call, they felt a strange sensation in their chest, a lightheaded, hollowed-out feeling. Not scared, but like something was pressing against them. Neither sibling saw or heard anything after that, but the chilling image of the featureless figure and the inexplicable hollowness it evoked left an indelible mark. What do you make of such a shared experience, where one sees the terror and the other feels its unsettling presence? If unseen watchers weren't enough, Some encounters push beyond observation, forcing us to confront more direct, sometimes violent, interactions with forces we barely understand, often through forgotten objects or ancient rituals. From unsettling, unseen entities that observe our every move, we now descend into a realm where the malevolent isn't just watching, but actively interacting, sometimes with terrifying and violent force. What if a simple brochure, a piece of paper, held the power to unleash pure dread, shadow figures, and terror into your home? This isn't a hypothetical. This is a chilling reality a friend of mine lived. When my friend was around 5, they stumbled upon a Halloween brochure at a welcome center. It had a flaming pumpkin on the front, and even then, something about it felt deeply unsettling, like it was staring back. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The brochure was forgotten until years later, as a teenager, they picked up another one at a fast food place. Same fiery pumpkin, same unsettling vibe. They tucked it into their backpack, thinking nothing of it. But that's when things started to go sideways. When they were home alone after sunset, their usually calm dog would stiffen, ears perked, a low, rumbling growl building in its chest, before erupting into sharp, panicked barks aimed directly at the window or front door. At first, they dismissed it, thinking it was a neighbor or a distant garage opener. But then, an overwhelming, suffocating dread would wash over them, pure and unadulterated fear. They'd check, porch empty, driveway too, but the feeling was undeniable. They even tried speaking out loud, "You're not welcome here, leave." And for a while, it would cease, only to return the next time they were alone. The paranoia began to consume them. Walking the dog became an ordeal, a constant feeling of being watched. Then came the shadow children, small hunched figures darting between trees and telephone poles. They'd catch a fleeting glimpse, and a bolt of pure terror would send them hammering home, heart pounding. They found the brochure, ripped it into 100 pieces, shredding every fiber of that unsettling paper, and once it was disposed of, everything stopped. Here's where it gets even stranger. At the time, they weren't entirely sure if it was that specific brochure. They also had a Field of Screams flyer in their room. Just to be safe, they destroyed both. The next fall, they picked up a Field of Screams flyer again. Nothing. No dread, no barking, no shadow children. Perhaps it was all just imagination or stress. Until they brought home another asterisk Jason's wood brochure. That very night, the exact same sequence began. The dog barking at unseen threats, the waves of oppressive fear rolling in the moment the sun dipped below the horizon, and the dark figures returning. This time, they didn't wait. They shredded it immediately. It never came back. They haven't touched one since. Could a simple, mass-produced piece of paper be a conduit for something truly sinister? Or are some objects just cursed to draw the dark to them? What about places where tragedy and history create a permanent anchor for despair? In the ancient sea town of Larne, Northern Ireland, where buildings stand for hundreds of years, there was a tiny jewelry store called Pollock's. For years, this seemingly innocuous shop was home to a full-blown poltergeist. The owner recounted years of escalating phenomena with a chilling, matter-of-fact calmness that made the story even more terrifying. It started subtly, a constant, unnerving feeling of being watched, phantom knocks on walls, and sounds from under the floor. Then, items began to move on their own. Objects would be thrown across the room, sometimes violently. The owner's son became a particular target. He'd be poked, have breath blown into his ear, and eventually, bites and scratches would appear on his body with no sensation of being touched. One harrowing incident saw a carefully arranged display of cigarette lighters scattered across the floor, as if someone had swept an arm across the cabinet. And then there were the disappearances. Rings, necklaces, watches, items left in locked storage would simply vanish. Months later, they'd reappear in impossible places, like under nailed-down floorboards that hadn't been moved in decades. This vanishing act became the entity's favorite game. The family tried to live with it, but the activity grew so intense, so violent, that the son no longer felt safe. They made a desperate decision. They called a priest to perform an exorcism. The owner described how they all held hands as the priest spoke to the entity. She opened her eyes when she heard a voice, a demonic scream, a growl that wasn't human, emanating from the priest himself. His face, she said, was completely distorted, changed in front of her eyes. After the exorcism, the events did die down, but she wasn't sure they ever truly left. The shop is now permanently closed. Could it be residual energy, the torment of a lost soul, or something far more malevolent, something that twists and distorts even the sacred? What happens when we ourselves, perhaps inadvertently, extend an invitation to these dark forces? In November of 2019, a group of friends, including myself, visited an old country house outside Ibarra, Ecuador. The area was steeped in unsettling local lore. Locals spoke of rituals under a rusted old bridge, sacrifices of animals, sometimes even people. One of the brothers casually mentioned that Ibarra was unofficially known as the city with the most satanic and witchcraft-related activity in Ecuador. As we unloaded our belongings, the group's joker, with a laugh, declared, "If there's any evil here, let itself show." Nothing happened immediately. Later that night, 3 of us were relaxing in what used to be a garage, a long, narrow room with metal bunk beds, a tiny table, and a massive, ancient wooden wardrobe pushed against the far wall. It was an ornate, heavy piece of furniture that looked centuries old. We were standing near the doorway, about 20 feet from it, when a distinct wooden squeak broke the silence. It was drawn out, like something heavy shifting on old floorboards, lasting for several seconds. I paused, mid-hit on a joint, and turned towards the sound. My blood ran cold. The wardrobe was moving, rocking, shaking violently, as if something trapped inside was desperately trying to escape. Stunned, we glanced at each other. The joker, wide-eyed, whispered, "You guys don't even know what I just tripped." The other friend, dead serious, asked, "Did that thing just move?" All 3 of us saw it. The massive wardrobe, solid wood and heavy as hell, had shifted several inches away from the wall. You could even see the faint outline on the floor where it had rested for decades. A moment later, the 4th friend walked in with more drinks. "Why do you guys look like you've seen a ghost?" We recounted what happened. He laughed, thinking it was a joke, until we insisted. Together, we approached the wardrobe. It was clear it had moved. We pushed it back and cautiously opened the doors, half expecting some demonic entity to emerge. Nothing. Just old, rolled-up blankets. None of us could sleep that night. The house was quiet, yet the absence of explanation was more terrifying than any phantom. To this day, we can't explain what shook that wardrobe, or why it happened immediately after someone jokingly invited something to show itself. It's a stark reminder that some doors, once opened, cannot easily be closed. These stories force us to confront the reality that malevolent forces can be drawn to us through mundane objects, historical pain, or even a casual word. But as unsettling as these direct confrontations are, what if the entities we encounter defy our very understanding, hailing from ancient folklore or dimensions we can barely perceive, leaving an indelible mark on our perception of reality? What if the monsters from your childhood nightmares were real? This final collection of stories culminates in encounters that push the boundaries of conventional understanding, leaving profound and often terrifying scars. My first truly chilling memory happened sometime during my high chair era. From where I sat in my high chair, I could look down the hallway of my grandparents' trailer. I remember crying for my older sister, who was only 4 years older at the time, maybe 5 or 6, because she would smile as she fed me. My mom always had attention that made me feel scared. But of course, that was from my addict dad. I remember eating applesauce, specifically with bananas, and once I tasted the banana, I looked up in excitement and saw this thing. I guess people call it the Hat Man, but from what was buried in my mind, it was more of a demon. The trailer roof was only 7 to 8 feet high, and this figure touched the top, with eyes that were easily around 6 feet, 8 inches. My dad was 6'4", and those red slits would have been looking down at him. Its hat looked like one of those old fisherman hats, like bucket hats, but more stiff. It had a brim that, and bear with me, had smoke like mist coming off it. Its whole body was pitch dark, and around it, it looked as though the smoke rolled off it, billowing and lifting its body in flames of black. That's the only way I can describe it today, and it still freaks me out. It did wave at me before going out the front door, so I guess the Hat Man ain't all that bad. My second story, though, is when I had to take out the trash one night when I was older. My dad had been kicked out at the height of his addiction, and my mom was a few years into her new relationship with my narcissistic stepdad. We had moved houses, to one that wasn't remote, but you could go outside in your underwear and bra at night without anyone seeing you if the porch light was off. We had hills of dirt about 1/4 of a mile from our house, where some kids would ride dirt bikes, roughly 15 of them in varying sizes and shapes. My stepdad decided he was angry at me for choosing to spend time with my biological dad once he started coming back into our lives, and he knew that I was terrified of the dark. He made me grab 3 full bags of trash and go out in the low 42nd, high 32nd, barefoot. I was only 8, wearing a dress, to walk the 1/4 of a mile over dirt and rocks. After getting halfway, the 3 horses in a nearby field went crazy, then dead silent. We had 2 purebred bloodhounds, who then growled in a way I'd never heard any animal in life, online, television, or anywhere else, growl. It was so deep and curdling, like they were ready to die fighting. I froze. My feet were hurting. I couldn't even feel the pins and needles of the wind anymore. Out from the ruts of the mound of dirt, I heard this clawing. The dirt wasn't hard enough to sound like cement was being scratched, and whatever it was sounded too fast to not show up with the way it sounded, almost like a spider with metal legs running on steel. But there was nothing to match that description in the surroundings, nowhere for it to logically make sense for the noise to come from. And in my panic, I dropped the bags and ran, only to get kicked out for the night, sleeping on top of the bales of hay. I couldn't see anything from the moonlight, but the sound of the dogs growling and that god-awful scratching still haunt me. Now, for a story that plunges into deeply personal, culturally significant terror. I am Muslim, and as part of my faith, I believe in the existence of jinn. You might have heard of them. They're mystical beings made out of smokeless fire. They are like the demons or ghosts spoken of in other folklore, but ours are slightly different. Some are benevolent, while others are malevolent. They live on a plane beyond our perception, unseen by human eyes most of the time. Anyway, sometimes they can appear in our world, taking on the shape of animals or humans or whatever form they wish. The evil jinn feed off fear and filth, and thus are attracted to places with negative energy and can even attach themselves to people or animals. But when they do materialize into our dimension, they can't do it perfectly. Every time a jinn takes on the form of another creature, something's always amiss. Maybe a foot twisted backward, a hand with an extra finger, A face that looks quite familiar, but not quite right. Almost like old-style AI art. There's always flaws. Something that doesn't belong and looks alien. I never thought I'd experience it myself until I finally did. And let me tell you, what happened to me that night wasn't just wrong. It was unnatural. It was late, a typical night, and I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to fall asleep. My room is on the first floor of a 3-story house facing the front yard. The night was quiet, and I wasn't thinking much, just trying to drift off to sleep. And then I heard it, a cat, I presume, yowling. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It's a sound I've heard before. Stray cats fighting or mating, or just being their usual noisy selves. But something about this was different. The yowling wasn't just a cat in heat. The sound echoed through the night, tearing into the stillness. It was desperate, and seemed to be coming from right outside my window. I was irritated, so I got up and went to the window to see what was going on. I was already too tired to deal with it, but curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked outside. But I didn't see anything. The street was empty, bathed in the dim light of the street lamps. There was no cat. The sound had gone. Confused, I returned to bed, trying to shake off the weird, uneasy feeling I got. The house was still, and my mind was too tired to think about it, so I grabbed my phone again and tried to focus on the screen. But then the sound came again, louder this time, and closer. That same mind-numbing yowling. My patience was wearing thin at this point. I groaned and got up, making my way back to the window. I was already tired and frustrated and was not in the mood for whatever animal nonsense this was. But when I looked outside again, there was nothing. The yard was empty. The street lamps casting long shadows, distorting the shape of the street lamp. That's when I saw a slender figure. It looked a little off-putting, but there was no cat to be seen. This time, I stayed by the window a little longer, scanning the shadows, waiting for the sound to return, eager to find the source of the intruding noise so that I could be at ease. But nothing. I was starting to feel unsettled. The sound, though absent, seemed to hang in the air, ringing in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I forced myself to shrug it off. I turned off my phone, lay back down, and closed my eyes, hoping sleep would overtake me. And just when I thought I could finally rest, I heard it again, louder and more urgent. This time, that same wretched yowling. But this time, it sounded different. Almost as if a person were trying their best to imitate the sound of the yowling. And to add to my growing fear, it sounded now as if it were right inside my room. I bolted up, heart racing, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. How could whatever it was be in my room? There was no way. But it was there, faint and unmistakable. The sound was all around me, encompassing itself around the darkness of my room. I raced to the edge of my room, hands shaking as I flicked on the light. The moment the light flooded my room, the sound stopped. It went dead silent. The night breeze and distant crickets seemed to fall silent, as if an apex predator had made its presence known. The sudden silence felt wrong, and my pulse hammered in my ears. I stayed frozen, staring into the empty room. Nothing, no cat, no anything. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. I left the light on. I didn't want to be in the dark again. Mortified, I stood there, staring at the corners of my room and then out my window. The only sound I could hear was my heart pounding. Every second felt like it stretched into eternity. The air was thick with this feeling of unease looming over me, as though something were watching me. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then 40, but nothing happened. I began to convince myself it had been nothing, just a trick of the mind since it was so late. I turned off the light and sank back into bed, feeling exhaustion take over me. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep. As I finally managed to fall asleep, I relaxed and eased down. But it was short-lived. I found myself in a dream, a nightmare that felt like a memory I had twisted, and its details were altered. I was running down a street, my street. But it was wrong. Everything was warped and distorted. The trees bent at odd angles, the shadows stretched too long, and the sky looked quite odd. Behind me, something was chasing me. I could feel it, the weight of it, the pure anger and hatred emanating from whatever it was. But I couldn't bring myself to look back, to give in to my fear. I couldn't shake it anymore, so I glanced over my shoulder, and there it was. An entity, huge, darker than anything I'd ever seen. Its form shifted like shadows dancing in the night. It was impossibly large, towering above me, its eyes glowing a dark yellow, and I felt a cold rush of dread wash over me as it moved closer. Its footfall was shaking the ground beneath me. I turned and ran faster, but it was getting closer. I felt its breath on the back of my neck. It chuckled, its laughter low, guttural, and echoing in the air. And then it was right there. The entity lunged at me. I tried to shield myself, covering my face with my arms, but I suddenly woke, heart racing, the alarm blaring in my ears. The room was slightly lit with the light from early dawn, but something was wrong. I sat up confused, still feeling the terror that the dream gave me. That creature or entity, whatever it was, felt so real. Then I noticed it. My window was open. I'd locked it the night before. I was sure of it, but there it was, slightly ajar. I froze. I couldn't explain it. My mind scrambled to make sense of it, but I couldn't. My heart pounded in my chest as I hurried to the window, closing it, locking it tight. But the feeling of being watched never left. The rest of the day passed into a haze. I couldn't shake the thought of the dream, the image of that dark thing chasing me. Something wasn't right. I tried to ignore it for the time being and continued with the rest of my day. But when I pulled into my driveway that evening, I saw a black cat. It darted across the yard fast, at an almost unnatural speed. I stopped and got out of the car, thinking I'd check on it. I didn't want to be paranoid, but something felt off. I looked around and, lo and behold, the cat was gone, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I went inside, still feeling very queasy about this whole situation. So I tried to distract myself with video games, and that certainly didn't help. The sense of dread gnawed at me. It felt as if I had a stalker who was just waiting, barely out of sight, watching. I went to bed early, hoping for rest. But as soon as I felt myself nearing slumber, I heard it again. The same noise I heard last night. The yowling. Distant, faint at first, then louder and closer. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to believe it was just some stray cat who was in intense heat. But deep down, I knew it was no ordinary cat. I fell asleep since I was quite tired, and the sound never ceased. Accepting that it was just a very loud, rambunctious feline, I decided I wouldn't pay it any mind. However, as if on cue, I felt a sense of dread unlike anything I felt before. I awoke, blinking rapidly to adjust my eyes in the darkness. I realized my body was paralyzed, like something was pressing down on me. I couldn't move. My body refused to obey, and panic rose in my chest as I struggled to move my limbs. Realizing in the moment that I was having an episode of sleep paralysis, I began reciting an incantation, a prayer that offers protection against evil. I could only move my eyes, so I screamed the prayer in my mind, and while doing so, I was able to slightly turn and look over at my window. There it was, the cat, the damned black cat who caused all these problems, sitting on the windowsill and the window was now open again. Its eyes glowed in the dark. Its yowling was a screeching now, practically screaming. Something was terribly wrong. I watched as its legs twisted, bent backward. It looked so wrong. It was like its bones had been rearranged, contorting it into ways that no living being ever could. The sight of it made me feel sick to my stomach. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell so badly, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then the cat did something impossible. It stood up on its two hind legs and smiled at me while looking straight at me. My heart stopped and I was frozen. It moved closer, its twisted limbs jerking, the unnatural movement, sending waves of terror through my body. Its body stretched, the fur dissolving into darkness. The form of the cat was now gone, replaced by a void of emptiness. And then I heard a ragged voice. It sounded like someone whispering. The words sounded strange and foreign, but somewhat recognizable, but a language I'd never heard before. Its voice made my blood run cold. By this time, I had finished reciting the prayer for protection and began regaining control of my limbs. Just as I was about to move, without warning, the creature looked at me, its grin dissipating into anger. It let out an awful, blood-curdling shriek and jumped out the window, looking at me one last time before its body, twisting in the night, disappeared into the shadows. I lay there motionless, still paralyzed. The terror clung to me like a second skin, and after what had happened, I couldn't sleep that night, nor the one after, because when I closed my eyes, I felt that same presence. The strange cat never appeared again, and the yowling I never heard either. In the days that followed, things seemed to go back to normal. Every time I passed a reflective surface, I feared a shadow might flicker at the edge of my vision. The terror of what I saw and heard stays with you. That night, I tried to go to sleep fast, in fear that I'll hear it again. The faintest, most chilling yowling in the distance. I hope none of you ever experience this. It's truly disturbing. These stories, particularly the last, push the boundaries of what we understand about reality. They force us to question not just what we see, but what we believe. What if these ancient tales, these cultural warnings, hold a truth that science hasn't yet caught up to? Have you ever felt a presence that defied explanation? Or witnessed something that fundamentally changed your perception of the world? Share your thoughts below, because these are the encounters that stay with you long after the lights go out. If you're still awake, thank you for braving the dark with us tonight on Midnight Whispers. If these stories stirred something in you, a chill, a memory, a shadow, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more true horrors, and ring the bell so you never miss a whisper from the night. Sleep tight, if you can.